see a glimpse of Jesus's upside down power. His kingdom is one that does not come with the violence and the weapons of this world. We may have been lulled into a different expectation. Starting back in chapter 11, we looked at a couple weeks ago, where Jesus comes in and stops the daily sacrifice, claiming to be the king, the anointed one who has authority over God's temple. He then, through a series of tests, shows that he truly is the one who should be worshipped and honored. And then we ended last week, we looked at how Jesus actually, in this very climactic moment, predicts the downfall and the destruction of the Jerusalem temple itself. The place where for the ancient Jews, heaven met earth, and Jesus is there saying, this building is going to be destroyed. It's incredible. And so you're almost lulled into this idea that the next chapter should be Jesus picking up the sword, rousing an army, and showing up with that kind of might and power. Again, we're looking at the story of how Jesus became king, and he just, for several chapters, starts acting like he's the one in control. He is in control, and I think Mark is doing something really intentional, because then when he turns the page into chapters 14 and beyond, we start to see how Jesus is exercising his power, and it's completely upside down. He gathers his disciples together, and they hold a Passover meal. Jesus puts himself into the Passover story in a really important way. He doesn't show up like Moses, about to vanquish Pharaoh and lead the people through these miracles into the promised land. He shows up like a dying lamb. He is going to be the Passover lamb himself, and it's through his body and his blood that he's going to enact this great exodus from sin. And so again, the position, if you're the king coming into Jerusalem, you wouldn't relate yourself with the dying lamb. You'd call upon great figures of the past like Joshua or Moses or David. So what is going on here? Then he, after they eat, they go to the Mount of Olives, and we enter into today's text this famous story of Jesus crying out to his Father in the Garden of Gethsemane. He starts to predict that all of his followers will desert him. Even Peter, one of his right-hand man, is going to desert him. And so he goes and he starts praying in anguish. He even says that he is very sorrowful, even unto death. This sort of portrayal of weakness is not what you'd expect from the coming king, but it's exactly what Mark wants us to see. He wants us to see in what seems like Jesus' weakest moment is actually his most powerful. This is actually a glimpse of the upside down power of God's kingdom. It's through weakness and dying for his enemies that Jesus is actually going to bring his kingdom in great power. A couple just observations to keep in mind. We see the cup here again. We saw that a couple weeks ago in chapter 11, where he's talking to James and John, and they say, can we sit at your right and your left when you come in your glory? And he says, can you drink this cup? Can you be baptized with this baptism? And this cup of God's wrath, which calls upon those images from the prophets of God pouring out a cup of wrath upon the nations. Jesus now here is praying about the cup, saying, Abba, Father, please take this cup from me. And so maybe think about that. Remember the request of James and John, and you can go back into Jeremiah and the prophets to really dig into what is this image of the cup. And Jesus here is taking it on himself. At the end of this, he's betrayed by one of his best friends. This is a sad, just heart-wrenching moment to even just think about. This is one of the men who he poured his life into, who he walked with for year after year. They shared everything together. That is one of the ones that he is betrayed by. As Jesus enters in to his kingdom and becomes the king of the entire universe, he's experiencing the deepest grief and hurt of any individual throughout human history. He's betrayed by his best friends. He's hurt, he's mocked, he's beaten, he's left alone. There's so many aspects of what Jesus experiences in this last week of his life that connect so deeply to our own human experience. Just one aspect, this is just me talking, one thought experiment here. I asked the question, what convinced Jesus ultimately to take this cup? Because 3 times he pleads with the Father, please take this cup from me. God, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go to the cross. I don't want to have to die. He knows how awful it's going to be. So what ultimately convinces him, and this is maybe not the only answer, but just an idea for you to mull over. He goes and he prays, and he has his 3 best friends, Peter, James, and John, with him. And then he goes back. So the first time he prays, Father, take this cup. And he goes back and he finds Peter asleep. He wakes him up and says, can't you stay awake with me for 1 hour? I need you right now. I need my friends to support me right now. And he goes back and he prays. And he comes back to Peter and he sees him asleep one more time and he wakes him up. And he says, couldn't you stay awake for 1 hour? And he goes back and he prays. And then for the 3rd time, he comes back and he finds Peter asleep. And I think that number of 3, it's this finality to that moment. He sees Peter sleeping 3 times and he says, if my best friend can't stay awake with me for 1 hour, then these people that I love, that I've come to save, what hope do they have? They couldn't do it at all. I think it's like he's living out his answer. He's asking God, can I take this cup from me? Can I do it any other way? And then he sees his best friends, his followers, who he's called and cultivated over these years. They can't even stay awake for 3 hours. And Jesus' answer is lying, literally, right in front of him. If his friends, his closest friends, couldn't even stay awake when he asked them to, what hope do we have? And I think that's his answer. He says, well, then I'm more than willing to take this cup. I have to do it. For their sake, for our sake. Jesus looks at his sleeping friends and says, yeah, this is the only way. I've got to do it for their sake because they definitely can't save themselves. So think about that, and yeah, just as you get into the depth of this scene, the heartbreaking moments of this scene where his best friends are betraying him, are abandoning him, and think also about our constant theme of Jesus becoming king. How is this the build-up to Jesus becoming king? What strange story are we living in where this is the way that Jesus is coming into his glory, into his power, into his kingdom, by taking this cup of wrath, by being abandoned by his friends, by being betrayed, by portraying himself as a Passover lamb who's about to be killed. It's just everything about this is upside down from the way the world normally operates. So take some time with this. This is a really deep, important passage for our own faith. I hope that's encouraging and challenging for all of us. Thanks, everybody.